Welcome to another episode of the Collision Vision, driven by Auto Body News. As always, I'm your host, Cole Strandberg. Today's episode marks yet another in our series titled Operational Excellence: Shop Strategies for Success. Today's conversation is all about the talent side of your operation, as well as an update on the talent shortage and how to solve for it in your shop. Today's guest is kind of the guy in the talent space, as well as a multi-time guest here on the Collision Vision and a very good friend of mine. Jay Goninen is the co-founder and president of WrenchWay, and more recently, the owner of his family's longtime repair shop. Additionally, Jay hosts his Beyond the Wrench podcast. Today, we're going to talk all about how to hire, retain, and develop a world-class team for your organization. Enjoy the show. This episode is sponsored by Hunter Engineering. At Hunter Engineering, the theme behind all their products is do it right, do it once. So when you're doing alignments, the time to find hidden damage is before you start, not after. The workflow for Hunter's collision alignment system surfaces the trouble right up front by providing 5 additional collision-specific measurements, like toe out on turn, maximum steer, and ride height, to find the problems right away. It's all about efficiency, so find the damage before it finds you. To learn more about Hunter's collision alignment system, visit hunter.com. Enjoy the show. Jay Goninen, thank you for joining us again on the Collision Vision.
It's a pleasure to be back with you, Cole. Always enjoy our conversations. Looking forward to this one.
Absolutely, man. And so much of what we've talked about in the past touches on what we're going to talk about today. But I want to go a little bit deeper as we're in our series on operational excellence. Obviously, a huge component of that is the talent piece: recruiting, retaining, training talent. It's something that is so important right now more than ever. And I don't know who would have a better, more intensive, broad perspective on this topic than you. And before we dive in, I'll talk about it a little bit in our conversation today. But something that really sparked the idea for this episode was some time you and I spent together in Greensboro, North Carolina for the Southeast Collision Show. You gave a presentation on just this topic, so we'll reference that a fair bit. But just to kind of dive right in, I want to talk about the current state of the technician shortage and recruitment and retention. So you've been vocal about the challenges in recruiting and retaining technicians for a few years now. Can you share your perspective on kind of the current state of where we are today?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is similar to what we've talked about in the past in terms of how impactful this is to our businesses, not having enough people in the industry to really satisfy the demand that we need. I think everybody that has a shop feels that day in and day out. I think what is changing and what we're seeing, and it's really positive, is a lot of these shops really starting to kind of work on their business rather than in their business as much. I know it's very cliche to say that, but it really is important as we look at today's technicians and really trying to understand what is it that is making them leave the industry? What is it that is making them maybe not want to come into the industry in the first place? And so I think as we're getting a better understanding as an industry, you are starting to see shops adapt and get better at this. I think be a little bit more intentional about recruiting in general. So I think from the shop's perspective, that part is getting better. I think there's still really that really deep need for technicians, and it's hard because I think a lot of times when we come on and talk about the state of recruiting and technicians as a whole, some of it is the same over and over and over again. And I think at some level we kind of get sick of hearing that noise, right? Of, oh yeah, the technician shortage. But the reason why we talk about it over and over and over again is because we are still in that current state of needing more people and more bodies, and not just more bodies. Like, we need more talent in this industry as a whole. So I think a lot of the same of what we've seen in the past, but maybe some different ways of going about how to fix it.
Well, and it's a great point. And from your perspective, what are some of the reasons we're in the place we're in today? It feels like this has been a we've seen it coming. It's here. Why have we seen it coming for as long as we've had?
I think if you go to any social media platform, whether it's on Facebook or X or TikTok or anything, a lot of times you'll see our best in the industry talking negatively about the industry. And so for me, I think it starts at its core of taking care of our best and brightest and making sure that they are really, really happy, because in a lot of ways it's not an easy job, right? I think we all know that. It's very labor intensive. It takes the right mindset. And I think, when we look at this problem that we have, until we're able to get our best and brightest to speak glowingly about the industry, we're going to continue to struggle with that. Because if you're a young person or a parent of a young person and you're out on social media, and maybe your child is looking at becoming a technician as a career, and if they go out and they look at all of kind of the garbage that's out there, and some of the negativity that surrounds our industry and specifically that role, why in the world would you let your kid go into it, right? And so I think it starts there, and it starts by getting some of these people that do love the industry to have more of a voice and talk more, and not feel like they're going to get attacked when they do put a positive note on a social media post. So I think all in all, there are a lot of people that are really, really happy in this industry. We need to hear more from those people. And we need to figure out why some of those people that are detractors are they're so passionate about being negative, because I think that's one reason why we really kind of stay in this stalemate of where we're at.
Man, the positivity piece is so important. It's something that you do a very good job of putting out there into the industry. There are some others that do it as well. I think now at a macro level, we're really getting some positivity at the technician ranks, and groups like iCar and CREF doing some really good work. But it's interesting to see the kind of ebbs and flows in the industry. I joined the industry about a decade ago, and at that time, there wasn't this shortage that we're having on the technician side, but leadership and ownership of the businesses really had this negative view of what the industry is going to be in the future. And now that we've moved forward, it's really pivoted to where there's a lot of positivity from the leadership ranks, but maybe that negativity was slow in trickling down to the technician ranks. Who knows? Really an interesting study and an interesting thought. How has and I touched on it a little bit there, but how have you seen the industry as a whole evolving to try to approach some solutions here for our technician shortage?
I think people are starting to understand that we have to invest in the youth, right? We have to invest in building that pipeline of new talent coming in. I think a lot of shops in the past would look at it and say, okay, we're not getting an immediate ROI on this, so we're just going to completely ignore it, right? And we can't have that happen. We need for shops to be active in their schools, and really supporting them at a program level, not just a student level. I think so many of us go in to that relationship with the school, and we're doing that to just get that one individual out of there for our shop. And I think it's maybe a little bit of a wrong approach, right? I think we need to be going in and supporting that program that ultimately is the one that's going to be the engine that's going to be able to pull or push out more skilled labor. So I think in a lot of ways that's been cool to see some more buy-in there, and some maybe more understanding that by doing that, you're not going to get that immediate ROI, but you have a sustainable pipeline for the future that will kind of really produce that consistency that I think everybody's looking for. I think we all want consistently busy shops. We want consistently, uh, uh, we want a consistent level of talent in the shops actually working on that work that's coming in. So I think the more we adapt our mindset and the way that we approach this shortage, and I think the more we look at the long game rather than just kind of the immediate hurt that we have, I think the more we're going to be in a better position as an industry.
Love it. Love it. Love it. I talked about this when we first kind of opened our conversation, but your presentation at the Southeast Collision Show, it was titled Navigating the Challenges of Recruiting and Retaining Technicians. Pretty on the nose. It's exactly what I want to talk about here. It was very well received. It was a crowded auditorium. There was a ton of Q&A at the end. So I'm going to ask a very lazy question as a podcast host, but can you walk us through an overview of what that presentation was about?
Yeah. So the way that we put this presentation together was really one to provide understanding to the current day market of technicians. We actually referenced our Voice of Technician survey that we did late last year. We're actually in the process of getting our 2024 Voice of Technician survey ready to go out later this fall. So we were able to take that feedback and things that we saw in the survey and really kind of form our presentation around that. We looked at recruiting trends, what people are doing or what successful shops are doing to be able to find these good technicians. And I think going back to the core of that piece of the presentation, a big factor in that is just being a good place to work, right? And being realistic that you are a good place to work. Or if you're not, being able to look in the mirror and make changes needed to become that destination employer. It can be a really uncomfortable feeling to maybe have that conversation internally to say, hey, maybe we're not as great of an employer as we think we are. And being able to get data and being able to get feedback from your own team to tell you what you're good at and maybe what you're not so good at is really, really important. And then we kind of wrapped it up with different improvements. We had 5 improvements shops can make to be able to be better at this. And so as we went through that, obviously there was a lot more detail in the actual presentation itself, but I think being able to kind of hit on those things, why we have the issue that we have, some success stories and things that shops are doing well to put themselves in a better position, and lastly, some really simple things that shops can do to get themselves in a better spot.
Love it, man. And it was awesome. It resonated. And I want to put you on the spot here because I'm not sure if you have these notes in front of you or if you can rattle this off by memory, but would love some actionable insights, those takeaways for shops, how they can kind of put themselves in a really good position to recruit and retain the best talent.
Yeah, out of the presentation, the number one thing was actually making recruiting a priority. And it's really easy to say, really hard to actually do. And the way that I and our team at WrenchWay likes to kind of push for that is to anchor it to a monthly meeting, right? Anchor recruiting to a monthly staffing meeting and really have open dialogue with your leadership team on what you're doing to become a better employer, what you're doing to find technicians. I think one of the big steps that a shop can take to put themselves in a better position is to get themselves all over the place, right? Like just try to get that branding out across the technician network because that will put you in a better light. So making recruiting a priority was a big one. Improving job descriptions, which is a really, really hard one. This was number 2 on our presentation. A lot of times, if you were to go out to Indeed or any other job board and look up the collision technicians and look through all of the job advertisements, you would find that a lot of them look exactly the same. So we get frustrated as shop owners when all the technician is looking at is money. And really the reason why they're looking at money is because they can't see anything else, right? Like they can't make any other types of decisions. So being able to maybe make your ad stand out in a way that's not just the standard, we're a great family business with great management and we offer free uniforms like that. There's nothing overly attractive about that. So I think being able to actually think through that, and there's some opportunities now that we didn't have in the past where maybe you can use Chat GPT to help you write that job advertisement. And you, as long as you're giving it good prompts, it can adjust a little bit. It can make it sound a little friendlier or a little bit more attractive. So you can do some cool things there to help in Word format to be able to do that. The other piece, and number 3, was start utilizing social media and doing it in the right way. I think a lot of times what we find with shops is that the only time they're posting on social media in a way that is talking to technicians is saying we're hiring. And when I take a step back and I look at our industry as a whole and look at a shop through the eyes of a technician, that technician a lot of times is just going to say, of course you're hiring, everybody's hiring, I know you're hiring. And if that's the only message I ever hear from you, it's really hard to develop kind of a mental image of you that's any different than any other shop. And most likely, if they're a good technician, they're being treated pretty well by their current employer. So what is going to make them jump to you? And I think a lot of times that branding and is really, really important. It's not nearly as hard as I think some people put in their heads as to what they need to do with kind of social media branding and employer branding. So I think that part is important. Number 4 was cleaning up the hiring process. And what we mean by that is to make it easy to apply with you, or at least have a conversation. And I think a lot of shops resist this a little bit because they might end up talking to somebody that's underqualified for what they're looking for, right? They might see that chef that's out there that somehow wants to come into our industry. And a lot of times we'll say, okay, that's just a garbage resume or a garbage application. But a lot of cases, there are some talented people out there that just aren't good at writing resumes. So being able to actually have conversations, almost more in like a networking type of format, where you're having good conversations is big. And then if you're cleaning up your hiring process, something as simple as having a careers page on your website is absolutely huge, because we'll get calls all the time from shops that want to sign up for WrenchWay, but they don't even have a hiring page on their own website. They don't have a way to apply to their job. And data shows if they are serious about looking at a job in your organization, they are going to research your website. They are going to end up at your website. So making sure that there's a really clean place for them to hit the apply now button. I love having a technician careers page. We have a lot of our shops that will actually put a technician careers tab on their site that goes directly to their WrenchWay page. And it's just really to be able to allow them to have a fluid hiring page that's not just updated every 2 years when they make others, some other type of changes to their website. It's an actual kind of page to show off who they are. So I think that part is really, really big. The last thing I'll add to the cleaning up your hiring process, when we look at it, a lot of times if we don't hire that person, and maybe that person decided that they didn't want to come work for us because the money wasn't right or the benefits weren't right or something didn't align with them, keeping a conversation going with those people over time. And maybe you get a cadence to where you're shooting them a text message every 3 months to say, hey, just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Something as easy as that can make you stand out from other shops. And really, it kind of shows what a common complaint with technicians is that they feel like they're just a number. Well, if you're texting and you are showing that you actually care about them as a person, I think their perception of your shop is going to be far different. And then lastly, the fifth tip was something we already talked about, which is really putting together a strategy, a long-term strategy to work with schools. How often are you going to be in the schools? Do you actually know who the person is at the school that's teaching the program? If not, then you probably need to get a little bit more active. You need to be in the school. And it's not hard. It's not as hard as what people think in developing that relationship. Sure, there's some schools that are a little bit more resistant, some teachers that maybe are a little bit more resistant. But I think what I found, especially on the independent side, we almost go into that relationship with a defeated mindset. Oh, that these big dealers, they own the relationships, or the OEs are pumping a bunch of money into the program, so we just can't compete with that. But if you actually go in and spend time in the program and you're not just focused on that one student that you're going to get out of that program, you're actually invested in the school in terms of being able to go speak to the class or being able to give a shop tour. I think your mindset will change over time, and you'll actually build a really good quality relationship. When I was on the industry side of this, when I was running shops, I actually had a bunch of instructors at my wedding, just because we've developed that tight of a relationship. And I think it's such a important piece for our entire industry to understand that this isn't going to solve itself. There's not a switch or a magic bullet that's going to take care of all of this. It's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some relationship building with the schools, to hopefully get them in a better place. And I think most shops that take that seriously do a really, really good job with that.
Man, we could spend an entire episode just on that one list right there. And I do think we're going to retouch on a fair bit of that, but it's awesome stuff. And you bring up a great point too. And I want to combine a couple things you said to cherry pick off the very top there. At the beginning, you talked about culture and being a good place to work. Another note I would point out is you mentioned when you were in industry. I think if my most recent news is still accurate, you are back in industry in a
I
way,
am.
right? In a full
Yeah, yeah.
circle. Talk to me about that, and then tell me about from a shop owner's perspective and from an industry leader's perspective, how can you create an environment that attracts and retains talent now that you're really thinking about that in a very direct way?
Yeah, it's fun because I can put really firsthand application into everything we talk about at WrenchWay, because I was able to go back and buy my family's independent automotive shop at the beginning of this year. It's been kind of a blessing that I have WrenchWay, because I think in some ways my mentality and how I attack things is almost obsessively, right? So having a different business to not just completely focus on that has been okay. And I think when I look at it, I've I've been lucky in that, my dad is staying on for another 5 years, and so it's kind of a slow transition over, which is a beautiful thing. But they already had a pretty good culture at the shop, and they've done a lot of really, really good things over the years. And so when I say that, for me, culture is like, I don't hate going to work, right? Like I like the people I work with. I actually care about the people that I work with. And I'm proud if I'm wearing a shirt with my shop's name on it and just the general public. I'm proud of that, right? And so I think we've got that there. And one of the, I think, things I've been able to add in coming back to the shop is a lot of the stuff that is intentional around recruiting. We're lucky enough to have a full staff down there right now. But something as simple as bringing in a student apprentice. We've got an amazing 16-year-old young man down at the shop right now. I honestly wish he was a couple years older, because he's really, really good. And we keep trying to develop that next generation. And my hope is that we're able to kind of take that to the next level. Now, some of the simple stuff that we were able to do, and I think this is all stuff that just shows that you care about your people. We actually had a young technician come on board a few months back, came from a dealership. And when we brought him in for an interview, I think we were all excited, right? Which happens to a lot of people when you talk to a talented technician. I did the phone interview with him initially, and just an outstanding person. So I was really excited, probably a little too excited to bring him in. And once we got him in, we just laid out the red carpet for him for that interview, in-person interview that we did. I actually wasn't even there that day, but I had arranged for my dad, who, still there most days, our service manager, and another technician in the shop who happened to be a really good friend of this technician. I had them take him out to lunch on that first day, on that interview, and just really get to know him at a different level than just sitting in a normal interview. So we did that, brought him back, walked him all the way through the shop, made sure we introduced him to everybody, and ultimately were able to get him on board. And I think some of the stuff that we do from a culture standpoint is what we're trying to build there. And I think a lot of shops should do this, is to really build that magnetic culture, build a culture where it pulls good people to you rather than constantly going out of desperation and trying to find somebody. And I think we're in a really, really good spot there right now. So now it's not taking our foot off the gas, right? And this is what I've been guilty of in before when I was running shops. where we would get a shop in good order, and I was managing multiple locations for their parts and service departments. And we would get a shop in good order. They would be fully staffed, and you're feeling really really good about things. And then something would happen. We had one specific location where we had a technician. We It was an underperforming location. We rebuilt the staff, and we were in a great spot there. And we're just sitting back and like, hey, yeah, we did it. We're in good shape. Well, with it over the course of the next few weeks, I think we had one technician left to go work for their family business. Another technician got in a car accident and actually had some medical issues where he was going to be out for like 9 months. And so we went from being really, really happy with what we had to like scrambling to try and take care of all the work. And I think what I learned through that was that you can't take your foot off the gas. You have to continue to be aggressive with this. And that's the perfect opportunity to, like, when you're fully staffed, to be able to get into the schools and really work on developing those relationships. It is a good time to send the text message to some of the people that you had interviewed over the years. I think all in all, that part for me has been a lot of fun to get back in. And then I think over the course of any of our careers, right, you learn from your past mistakes. And that was one of the things that, for me going into this first year at the shop, it was kind of sit back, learn how they work, because they've done a really, really good job with their culture over the years. And then adding to that, how do we just keep our foot on the gas and really, really be intentional about having the best staff humanly possible at that location?
Man, again, a lot to unpack there, a lot of different ways. I'd love to dive in and learn more. I think something that jumps to my mind is that's exactly right. That last point you made about never taking your foot off the gas when it comes to talent, because one thing happens and everything has changed. And there's a few ways to do that, right? Keep that pipeline going, that marketing for new technicians. It's developing, as you said, the relationships with the schools and furthering that. But there's another piece too that I want to talk to you about, and that's development within your organization and creating that culture and that opportunity for the next man or woman to step up and make that happen. So while I think a lot of folks think of WrenchWay as focused on recruiting and bringing in, there is a training and development component there as well. And I want to spend some time there. Talk to me about the importance from your perspective and the perspective of WrenchWay for continuous training in the development and retention of technicians.
If you look at what our Voice of Technician survey said, it was a lot of that need for more training from good technicians, right? The best of the best, I feel like, always have that mentality that they want to be learning more, especially in our industry right now, especially on the collision side. When we look at ADAS and we look at all this different technology that's coming, and some of the uncertainty of what our role is in doing that, or what the business opportunity is for that. I think when we look at all of that, it comes down to, for me and what I see out there, the point of like trying to create a vision and trying to create something that people want to follow and understand where they're going. I think the technical training side is obviously very, very important, right? But I think the career pathing piece of that is even more important, because they want to know maybe what steps they need to take to get that raise or to get that promotion. And even the visibility to see that there is potentially a promotion down the road, especially with little shops or smaller shops. They might look up front and see the owner up front, and maybe an owner's family member, a son or daughter that's also up front. And they're thinking in the back of their head, there's not a whole lot of room for me here, right? There's not a whole lot of room for me to grow. So as I'm building my technical skill, and I maybe look at 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and I don't see a path in my head, I think that's what drives anxiety and drives somebody to want to look somewhere else. So if you're able to sit down with your team and talk to them about kind of what you see for the future of the company, in that, hey, you know what, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, it probably is going to look a lot different than it does right now, and it will change. And I think you can build excitement. Obviously, you have to be realistic with that. You can't try to paint a picture that's not realistic. But I think people want that purpose. They want to know where they're going, and they want somebody good to follow. And if we struggle with communication, if we don't have active, really good kind of heart to heart conversations with our team, we're going to struggle with that piece, right? And I think when we struggle with communication, that's when the anxiety goes up for a technician, right? Because if they're in the back and they don't hear much in terms of anything other than what they need to be doing on their daily agenda, their daily schedule, they're not going to feel great about where they're at, right? So I think the more you can get out there with communication, and even as it relates to training, understanding what the technician is actually wanting for training, right? Because at times it can be really, really hard to find training. And if we struggle to find that training, or maybe we just haven't properly identified it, because I think in the collision business, especially, there are a lot of really good training opportunities out there, but we have to be able to be comfortable to maybe put somebody on a plane to send them somewhere. We have to be comfortable to actually go out and find that really, really good training, rather than just kind of sitting back and waiting for a trade publication to come that has some training listed, right? Like, we actually have to go find it.
100%. And it is an investment from a training perspective. You touched on something that's technically free though, and I want to talk a little bit more about that career pathing for folks entering the industry, already in the organization. How can one put together a career roadmap that they feel good about it? How do you view that when talking to some folks maybe at the entry level and saying, "Hey, this is a great job, sure, but it's a great potential career for you as well."
Yeah. I think a lot of us in the industry can use our own stories to be able to tell, right? And for me, starting off as a technician young in my career, I didn't know that there was anything else out there until I was almost forced to go outside of being a technician. So I think being able to share stories about maybe where you started off at, in your career, and how that progressed, and not shying away from the point that, hey, maybe if you bought your own business, or you started your own business, that, I think a lot of people are afraid to share that story because they don't want their staff going and starting a business. But if you have that technician that truly someday wants to start their own business, being able to say, hey, let me help you get there, because I think you're going to create just more friends that way, right? If you have more friends and they're going to go start a business, whether you want them to or not, at least you can be there to kind of mentor them and help them grow. I think, again, that shows that you care more about the person. But I think it all comes down to listening to that person. I prefer one-on-one meetings with my team to sit down, understand what they want out of their career. Do they want to eventually go into the office? Do they eventually just want to become a master technician? What is it that they have for their goals? And just knowing that this is probably going to change over time, right? Maybe even that technician that just never saw themselves going anywhere outside of the shop, all of a sudden, turns 50 years old and is starting to think about their body in a little bit more intentional fashion. Being able to adjust to how their life changes, I think, is big. But then once you sit down and talk with them, this is not the most complicated thing in the world, right? Just put it down on paper. Hey, this is what Tim wants to do for his career, and how are we going to get Tim to that point? And I think being able to tie it with different certifications, if you're working with ICAR, if you're doing some different things where you can kind of really set that path forward. In order to get here, you need to take these steps, and then follow those steps. Be able to go back and maybe once quarterly, or twice a year, go back and sit down with that person and say, hey, how are we doing on this? How are we making any progress? And I think that helps drive some accountability. In a lot of ways, it was the technician's idea to start with, right? They want to get to this place, so you're helping them reach their potential by sitting down and really consistently looking at that. So again, that can be a really, really hard thing to do. This is where I love bringing this up in that monthly meeting as well. As how are we doing with this? Are we doing our one-on-one meetings? Are we really sitting down and being intentional about career planning with our team? because they will be more loyal to you if you're actually sitting down and showing them a path to where they can go. And hopefully it aligns both with the shop and the technician as to where they do want to go to, and you can get them there.
I love the concept so much because it's such a win-win. You help somebody in their livelihood in providing a great lifestyle for themselves and their families, but you also are building better, more engaged, hardworking, talented teammates, and it's such a great combination, and I love the concept. I love hearing about it. You said something that seems like a bit of a double-edged sword, and I want to get your perspective on this, because to really do that, it stands to reason that the single store smaller operators are able to have more consistent one-on-one communication. However, from my observation, and I'm interested in your observations on this as well, there's a sweet spot for that career upside within an organization. And it doesn't have to be the big national consolidators, but you see a lot of really good recruiting momentum and retention momentum for a lot of these kind of mid-size consolidators, these 5, 10 store groups. How do you view kind of growth as a key benefit or an important factor for recruiting and retaining technicians?
I think it's essential, right? To have growth, and this is to even take a step back, to be able to have some level of financial discussions with your team about how the business is doing, I think is really important because one, you train your team to understand that profit is not a bad thing, right? We need to be profitable. We need to grow in order to offer the things that we want to offer you, right? If it's career opportunities and we want to, ultimately build our business so that there are more opportunities in our own shops, I think we need to paint that picture, and it does tie back to profitability. And I think a lot of us tend to shy away from that conversation. And you don't have to show them all your books, but be able to have good KPIs that you can show to the team and have open dialogue about that. Because I think in a lot of ways, if you don't do that, and maybe that technician that's in the shop sees what the posted labor rate is versus what they're being paid, and they don't have a full understanding of everything that goes into why the labor rate's where it's at, it can lead them to think, hey, this shop is just profiting like crazy and they're not taking care of us. Well, in reality, a lot of shops might be scraping by, or they're struggling to make payroll. There's a lot of other elements to it. And of course, you don't want to scare your team, right? If you're struggling on that financial side, you definitely, I think your job in that type of CEO role is to make your team feel safe and to make them feel secure. But you also have to have conversations with them to understand that in order to get to where we need to get to, we do need to be profitable, and we do need to run a good business. We do need to be efficient. We do need to be productive, right? When we look at productivity levels, that can be a real struggle for a lot of people. So helping that technician understand the why. Why do we need to be profitable? Well, we need to be profitable because we want to grow a really good business that takes care of our people. We want to offer the top level of benefits that we can offer. We want to have the top pay that we can pay you. But in order to do that, we actually need to be profitable. So I do think there's an opportunity, again, with communication to technicians from the shop level, where you can kind of build that understanding and help them understand that we do need to grow. And in order to grow, we're going to need you to work really, really hard. But then as a reward for that, we're trying to be profitable so we can take care of you. And I think the more you can get that message across, the more understanding you're going to create.
Let's grow together, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's all about. Let's make opportunities with each other, alongside each other, and I love that thought process and that way of looking at it. I want to get into one of your favorite topics here in a second, of course, that being schools and how to work with them. But before we do, you mentioned some resources specifically in the collision repair industry for training, albeit some that might require some investment on your end. But how do you view the balance between on the job training and some of that more formal training that you can go out and get?
That is a really, really tough question, right? And I think For a shop like, say, I'll use our own family shop as an example. We have 4 full-time technicians. When you remove one of those technicians to go attend training, you lose a quarter of your productivity for that week or whatever it might be. So it's really, really hard to do that. I do think there's some really cool things out there that we can use to be able to keep our people trained. I'm about to have David Boyes from today's class on the podcast, and that's little bite-sized training each day. I think that's a brilliant idea. So there's more stuff like that coming. And I think being able to understand that you need training, like this stuff isn't slowing down, the technology isn't slowing down, the tools available to us, that's not slowing down. You have to be on training, right? Because if you're not, you're going to be a dinosaur, you're going to be gone. And so being able to one, come to terms with the fact that you might lose some productivity due to training, and that's okay. Like we have to train. The other piece, and this is the hard part, this was the hardest part for me when I was in industry, was laying out a training plan and trying to make sure that you're treating your technicians fairly, that you're not just favoring one technician over all the other technicians and sending that one technician to all the training. It can be really easy to fall into that trap because you have that one really good technician that you want to keep feeding training to. But the more you can wrap your arms around what training is available, and I love this as an exercise at the start of the year, maybe even Q4, sitting down, really putting together a training plan, and just it can be as easy as at first just starting by listing off all the training available, and then understanding what training your technicians need. Are you going to train them up on some of their weaknesses? Are you going to take what they're already good at and maybe leverage that more and get them even more training on that side? I think it's interesting because it all ties back to what your vision is on that shop. If you're one of those shops that wants to train up on weaknesses, that's perfectly fine. You just have to be able to understand what their weaknesses are and be able to get them training for that. Or if you are maybe going into more specialty type roles where you want to really get their good qualities and emphasize those, you want to get them into training that's going to help move them that direction. And so sitting down, maybe getting a wish list of trainings for each of your techs and understanding what they need first and foremost is great. But then once you do that and you lay out a plan, sign up for the classes, right? Register for the classes, pay the money for the classes. And that kind of ties you to those classes, right? Because once you've paid for them, then you feel obligated to send your person. But as you sign them up, if they're having to travel for training, get their hotel booked, get everything done. There's a lot that goes into just signing somebody up for training. And so I think when we act reactively in that scenario, it feels rushed. It doesn't feel coordinated. It doesn't feel great from a technician's perspective. So if you can sit down and really kind of map that out and then, build them a little itinerary of their day. If you've got a technician and they're heading to the airport, if they're heading to the airport and they've never flown before is a good example. How can you make them feel comfortable in going through an airport? If they have to drive somewhere, making sure that you give them a vehicle to be able to take, or be very, very clear on what you're paying for mileage if they're taking their own vehicle. A lot of people can be really uncertain about that. And I think with young technicians specifically, they might not have the funds. A lot of times we'll send a technician to training and say, hey, we'll just pay for your stuff up front and then we'll reimburse you. You have to keep in mind, some of these young technicians are living paycheck to paycheck and might not be able to do that. So it might drive some level of anxiety there that how am I going to pay for this to even get reimbursed? And so being able to have those open conversations with your team so that, if they are feeling some level of financial insecurity, that you can be there to help them and be able to make them feel really, really comfortable and hopefully get their mind to be focused on the training that they're getting rather than how they're getting there.
Man, in addition to the investment to pay for that training and get it done, that little extra thoughtfulness seems like it definitely goes a long way. And it's something that a lot of folks, myself included, probably wouldn't have thought about up front. So that's really good, actionable stuff there. Now moving on to the schools. Yeah, I used the term win-win earlier about kind of that career planning for technicians. Certainly a win-win. Another win-win is getting involved with the schools. How can shop owners go ahead and start the process of building relationships with local schools and kind of create that pipeline of talent while also doing some good and helping out their community?
That's been the biggest growing piece of our WrenchWay platform, right? Is the ability for shops to connect with schools and have kind of open dialogue with them. But even if you're not using WrenchWay, I think if you're able to just go one, understand who it is at the school that you need to be talking to. Most schools are pretty open, so if you give them a call or shoot them an email saying that you have a desire to work with the program, they'll get you connected with the right person. In a lot of cases, that can be kind of a struggle, right? Because maybe you're talking to an administrator. Some teachers honestly aren't the best at getting back to us when we do reach out. So being able to be persistent, and so once you've identified that person, being persistent in wanting to have that conversation, and then actually following through with some things, right? If you offer to go and speak to a class, make sure you get up there and get it done, right? And make sure that it's planned out, or that at least thought through when you go to that school. As far as like if you're talking class, have an idea of what you're going to talk about. And I think when you go into that type of conversation, don't go in just trying to sell your shop to the young people. Give them some education about the industry, the opportunities that are out there. Build some excitement about not only your shop but the industry as a whole. And I think you'll start to see that when teachers get comfortable with you, they'll start bringing you back in for other stuff, right? And they are always looking for good partners, and they want to build those really, really good industry relationships. And I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of times the schools struggle with that side because they feel like whenever they need something, they feel like they have to cold call their spreadsheet, right? Like everybody that's came to the last advisory committee meeting, I have to call and try to get them to chip in. Whether it's like hey, we need this tool, but we don't have the budget to do it. Okay, can our team or our advisory committee maybe come together and help us out with it? That's maybe one of the more extreme examples, but I think once you identify the person, and then if you really focus on the relationship itself rather than that one-off student, you are going to find yourself in a much better position. And really, you have to be that shoulder to cry on for that school, right? When they have an issue, I think you're doing a good job when you're one of the first ones they call, right? Because they trust you, because you've built a relationship. And so many of us get stuck in the day-to-day fires that the school thing just ends up being, hey, we'll deal with it, and not overly excited about having to build that relationship. But I think as you get more and more involved, you do become more passionate about that program. I think you do have a vested interest in seeing that program have success. And if you can kind of have that mentality and you just kind of keep going to the school and you keep helping them out and you keep just building those relationships, maybe you just drop a box of donuts one morning and for the students to enjoy. I think there are a lot of little things that you can do that aren't crazy expensive to build a really successful pipeline for the future, and really understand where that teacher's coming from and what their needs are. And the more you do that, the better and more meaningful that relationship is going to be.
It's great stuff, and I've seen it firsthand, the impact that shops can have on schools and the impact that that relationship with schools can have on shops, and you guys have done a great job of kind of formalizing or at least shedding some real light on what those partnerships can do and what those look like. But Jay, man, as always, so generous with your time. I do want to go ahead and start wrapping up our conversation. And I'll start with the fact that, as you know, we like to wrap up each episode of the Collision Vision with 3 key takeaways. What are those from our conversation today?
I think the first one is one that I talk about a lot, and it's probably redundant, and people are sick of me, sick of hearing me say it, but it is making recruiting a priority, right? And not just doing it when you need people. I go back and reference that story that I had where I felt like I was in a really, really good spot with the shop, and then things change really, really fast. So I think that making recruiting a priority, keeping your foot on the gas, right? Even when things seem great, you're not kind of coasting. You're constantly trying to get better, right? So I think that is a really, really big one. The number two takeaway that I would have is to actually have a relationship with local schools and actively working at building those relationships and those partnerships. Again, not expensive to do. You can get involved by just simply making a phone call, sending an email, and really being able to develop that relationship. And the third one that I think would be great for a lot of people, that is low hanging fruit, is clean up your hiring process. Look at your entire hiring process as a whole, from the time that, from how you're posting your job ads to how you're interviewing people, how long is it taking you from an interview to a call to tell them whether they got the job or not. Really kind of looking at all of that. And something that is just really, really simple: make sure you have a careers page on your website, something where a technician can engage with you and simply click apply here. Something as simple as that. The more clicks you put them through, the harder it's going to be on them. So those are my three takeaways, and I think all of them are fairly simple, not expensive at all. If nothing else, maybe no cost, of ways that you can get better and hopefully be more intentional about recruiting as a whole.
Great stuff, man. And I know if the Greensboro presentation at the Southeast Show is any indication, I think there's a lot of folks that are going to have a lot of interest in learning more about what you have to say. And with that, I'd be remiss not to give a shout out to your podcast, the Beyond the Wrench podcast. Give us a quick plug on that, if you would.
Yeah, it's I think a podcast about getting the industry in a better place, right? We are able to talk to a lot of smart people. One of the things that I think we are very intentional about is not trying to be salesy. We do that for WrenchWay as a whole. We don't try to be salesy, but Beyond the Wrench, we're sitting down, we're talking about best practices, and we're talking about ways that shops can get themselves in a better position. We do cover the automotive, both repair and collision side, the diesel side, and this is dealerships and independents all together. And I think a lot of times, if you're looking for a podcast and you look out there and it says, hey, there's this diesel podcast, why would I ever listen to that? A lot of it has nothing to do with working on diesels themselves, right? It's about working on the people side. And those principles apply regardless of what type of business you have. So I would encourage you to come check out an episode and see what you think, because I think you can learn something. We get a lot of really, really smart people on there. And I think a lot of really good ideas come from there as well.
Love it. A lot of best practices to be shared, a lot of good insights to share between those two very similar industries. Where can people follow along or connect with you and learn more about WrenchWay?
Yeah, they can go to wrenchway.com if they want to learn more about WrenchWay. If they want to connect with me, they can go out on LinkedIn. As you know, Cole, I'm very active on LinkedIn and love to have conversations out there. So if you want to connect with me, go ahead and send me a connection invite, and I'll make sure to take it, and we'll start a conversation.
Fantastic. And not to put you on the spot here, but that presentation, again, I keep coming back to it, was fantastic. Is there any way for folks to get a hold of that or watch you do it again live soon?
I believe so. I would honestly have to check with the Southeast Collision Conference, the folks that put that on, to be able to see. But I think it's out there. I know there were some news articles around it and that kind of thing. But I tend to be around speaking at different places. I will be at Apex this year, although I'm not speaking there at SEMA and Apex. I'll be around there. So if anybody wants to connect there too, feel free to reach out, and would be happy to set up a meeting.
Awesome, man. Well, put me on the schedule. I will see you there. Jay Goninen, an absolute pleasure, sir. I'll be sure to put a bunch of links that we just talked about in the show notes. Make that easy.
Thank you so much, Cole. I appreciate you having me on, and for everything you do for the industry. The podcast is amazing. All of the things and the connections you have in the industry are just, it's awesome. It's very inspiring to somebody like me to see everything that you're doing out there, and glad I could just be a small part of it.
I appreciate you, my friend. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you again to Jay Goninen, president of WrenchWay, for joining us on today's show. Jay's positivity is infectious, and the man knows what he's doing when it comes to recruiting and developing an all-star team. With that said, I'd like to reiterate Jay's 3 key takeaways, and those are: number 1, make recruiting a priority. Build a recruiting brand, not just for when you need it, but keep your foot on the gas even when you feel good about your team, as that can change in an instant. Number 2, keep a relationship with your local schools. This is a win-win relationship. You help your community, you help students, and you help your business. Lastly, clean up your hiring process. Make it simple and easy to use as the applicant. Move quickly when the right person shows up, and have a recruiting page dedicated on your website. Make it easy on some talented folks. That's all for today's episode of The Collision Vision. If you enjoyed it, please give us a follow wherever you enjoy your podcast, or on YouTube, where The Collision Vision lives in video form. As always, on behalf of the Auto Body News team and myself, thank you for coming along for the ride.